Alrighty. Thank you very much for that, Albinus. And we'll go ahead and get into it if I can get all of the buttons to show up on the right space in my screen. Alrighty. So my name is Ethelwolf. I am going to be giving the class today on event stewardship, otherwise known as Autocrat 101. The SCA runs on events, and events run on volunteers, and specifically event stewards. I'm Ethelwolf, and almost all of my event stewardship has been in Alberon, but I've done 2 different midwinters. I've run some costuming classes at the Day of ANS. I've been an assistant to the Reeve, and mundanely, I was a nonprofit board treasurer for 7 years. So most of what I'm coming to you with is a combination of previous SCA experience from before the pandemic, as well as just general nonprofit administration information going forward. So the big thing about an event, there needs to be an idea, but to be able to do that, you have to have some paperwork to get out of the way. And unfortunately, unpopularly, paperwork and drudgery seems to be the things that people talk about when they talk about holding an event. That's not all it has to be. There are a number of checks and balances that go in to make sure that our nonprofit doesn't lose money and money doesn't run away. But all of the procedures and the steps that are put into place are supposed to be guardrails to help the aspiring event steward, not bars to imprison you and get you stuck in the one way of doing things. But it is true, making an event happen does involve a lot of moving parts, and so having a lot of organization is important. And this is things from having budgets, to having volunteers, to having approval and finding everything and make sure there's space on the calendar for everything you're working on. So these are just sort of things to keep in mind. This is sort of a loose agenda that we're going to be going over today, but for the most part, I'm going to go over a lot of the best practices and a lot of the good suggestions that I've run into when working with events and when doing event management, both mundanely and within the SCA. If you do have any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. I'll go ahead and get to them as we're going through, but there should be some time at the end of the presentation to go over specific questions and go with stuff. So events take time. This is one very important thing that I don't think is as obvious as it should be, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of planning, if nothing else, just to make sure that folks know your event exists, so that folks show up and will actually enjoy your event. But big inter-kingdom events can take years of planning, and they don't turn on a dime. I mean, for an example, look at Battlemore, look at Estrella. Some events can deal with a sudden shift in the way of the world, and others can't. So these things are important to keep in mind when you're planning out an event. Make sure you've got the time to start the plan. Big baronial events like Midwinter and Outlandish can take 6 months, if not more, to get all the contracts signed, to get all the pieces in place. But even a local feast can take a couple of months of planning just to make sure that folks know about it, that you've got a place to host it, and that you have the food to serve at it. So be mindful that there is always going to be a lot of lead time built into any event plan that you've kind of come up with. But let's start at the beginning. So you've got this idea for an event. We always need new events, new ideas. If nothing else, the pandemic has sort of made a giant hole in our kingdom calendar. And so there's a lot of opportunities to fill it back in again. Sometimes that might be an event that's happened a couple of times before and people want to bring it back again, but also bring some ideas, have some thoughts about something else you might want to be able to do. If nothing else, it gives us more of an opportunity to get together and share in the game. So what do you need to get started? Well, you need to see if anybody thinks it's interesting. One of the big things with an event is it could be really niche, but that could be a good thing, or it could be a bad thing, depends. Check to see if other people think the idea is interesting. Check with your local officers, see if they're interested in hosting that sort of an event, because all of the events that happen do have to go through a local group. And so therefore, if there's no buy-in from the local officers or from the local coronet, there may not be the opportunity to run that event. But the only way to know is to ask. Get an idea how many volunteers you might need. You get an idea as to how much money you think it might cost. This is another place where you definitely want to talk with the local officers or with anybody else who's run an event in your local group before. See how much it costs, see how much it works on. You don't necessarily have to have all of this stuff ready to go when the first idea strikes your mind, but these are things that you need to work with and get an idea of, because again, There's a lot of time, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of process involved, but it's something that should work out pretty easily once you have all the pieces in place. So work on your idea. Think about some of the different things. What goes into a good plan? Having a location, having a date, knowing who you're going to have come to the event, knowing what they're going to do at the event. And what happens if something doesn't go quite as well? Having a contingency plan, if nothing else, 2020 has shown us having a good contingency plan is almost as good as having a good event plan in the first place. So let's think about sites. There are any number of different places you can hold an event. Some of them are better than others for holding SCA events. Always be on the lookout when you're looking for an event idea. Find it. Maybe there's a new place in town that we haven't considered using as a place to hold an event. But also be aware about accessibility and weather concerns. You may be looking at a new event hall site in June for an event to be held in December. Does it snow a lot between here and there? Would a lot of people get stuck? So be aware of what kind of accessibility concerns you might have. Also, physical site requirements. Is it easy for folks to be able to get in and out and get around in, or is there a lot of ducking out of this building and going into that building and changing all over the place? Things to keep in mind when you're working on them. And also consider different use cases for different events. A site that's fantastic for a classroom setting, kind of like StagsCon, may not be the best place for holding a fighting collegium. And vice versa. If you need a big, wide open space to be able to have a big tournament field, that might not be the best place to hold an arts and sciences event. And so being aware as to what is happening at the site should help you inform whether or not you think this is a good site to even start considering and bringing up to your local group. The next thing to check is when. Check all of the calendars. There are innumerable different opportunities for calendaring here on the event. And if there's something on the local calendar already, on the day you want, you may want to consider, is it something that can be added to someone else's event? Is it something that someone else's event would already be benefiting from? Perhaps there should be another option for a time. But another thing to keep in mind is other things happening in other kingdoms. If you want to have a fantastic fencing event and have all kinds of folks come from all around the known world, make sure you're not scheduling it on top of the neighboring kingdom's fencing event, because, well, you're not going to get those folks to show up. And maybe if it's a big enough event, people will leave from your kingdom to go to that kingdom's event. So keep in mind what's going on in the area, going on in the region. Another thing to keep in mind is school calendars. If you're looking to hold a multi-day event, or if you're planning to have a longer event, does it line up with any school holidays or national holidays? If it does, that might be a benefit. Or if it doesn't, that could be a problem. Again, it really depends on what you're kind of doing and what your idea is. Then we need to look at who's going to help run the event. Because as an event steward, as a previous event steward, you do not want to be doing all of the work yourself. You will run yourself ragged, you will not enjoy yourself, and you will never want to come back and do it again. So many hands make light work. Find other folks to help you with this, or at least get an idea of the people who you might ask to help. Check with your local officers, check with your peers, ask them for people who they think would be good to help you with this event. Do not ask them to help you with the event specifically. They have their own jobs, they have their own work, they have their own things to do. If they feel they have time to volunteer themselves, fantastic. But don't approach the minister of the list saying, so we're going to have a tournament next Tuesday, are you coming? Find if they have any suggestions for any deputies or other folks that are interested that might be able to help out with this, rather than saying, well, you're the officer, you're the one that does it, and check with that. Another thing to keep in mind, at a minimum, any event is going to need a gate staff, someone to involved with the staff for the activities that are scheduled. So if it's a martial activity, you're going to need a marshal. If it's both a rapier and a heavy tournament, you'll need both marshals. If it's an arts and sciences class, you'll need someone to help you keep the schedules coordinated. And you'll also need someone to help you reconcile the money at the end of the day. The benefit is for small local events, perhaps the gate steward and the financial steward can be the same person, because at the end of the day, the majority of the funds are going to come in from gate. And so therefore, if they're already reconciling the gate books, they might be able to help you out with the event books. But again, don't make that assumption. Always ask, don't tell. This is a very important thing when trying to find volunteers. Let them volunteer for you. Do not assume that they will work for you. And then let's get to the what. What are we doing at this event? You've got a grand idea. You really like the concept of Byzantium, so you're going to come up with a Byzantine-themed event. Well, what are you going to do at your Byzantine-themed event? Is there going to be a tournament? Are you going to have classes? Are you going to have workshops? Are you going to have enough open time for folks to be able to do their own thing at the event? Is it going to need out-of-town instructors or other things like that? Just sort of spitball, what kind of things do you think are going to happen at the event, and make space for them. Plan for them, have an idea, have a general hope for the event. And then, if the past couple of years have taught us anything, be prepared is an important mantra. What happens when things fall through? I'm not saying that every event is going to need to have a backup site, but the possibility may occur that, oh, we need to have twice the space because we're going to raise the attendance cap. Do we have a backup site, and can we find one quickly? What happens if everything has to go back into a lockdown? Do we have the ability to move this event virtual? Can we do anything along those lines? And at the end of the day, if everything goes wrong, is there a refund policy? What happens if we have to cancel the whole thing? Have this in the back of your mind before you start working towards an event bid, because a lot of these things are not necessarily the way that you must do it and are things to require. You have to start with the idea and have a concept before you can actually get the wheels moving. But once you have all of this stuff sort of thought up, and once you've got the ideas together, then we can actually start working on the process. Let's actually start putting some pen to paper and make an event happen. So again, remember the timeline, remember the picture? The event idea is the first step. After that, then we get to work onto the paperwork. A thing to remember is always, once you've gotten the idea together, follow up with your local officers, with your local staff. Make that pitch. See if there's something that, if it's interesting. You may not have considered something that's actually on the calendar, or that someone else is already planning an event. And so you may unintentionally pick a date that someone else has already picked, but no one's put the paperwork in yet, so it's not officially on the planning calendar. And you might accidentally have an event at the same time as somebody else, or have the same idea as somebody else. If you run it past the local seneschal, run it past the local coronet, you'll know whether or not it's going to be a good idea, or if there's something that's going to be in the way. As I say, as most of my stuff comes from Alberon, I did have to throw a quick little plug in there for His Excellency Roland and Her Excellency Imania. But you can also do this same sort of thing when it comes to running a kingdom level event, or even a known world event. All of these things come together that we need to know everyone's on the same page, everyone's on board, because this cannot be done alone and should not be done alone. So definitely reach out and make sure that there's the opportunity and the space to be able to do these sorts of things. So it's all together, it's all ready to go. Let's make it happen. Now, SCARS is relatively new, so it's on the slides because it is a thing to be aware of. I have never actually done a SCARS event, so I don't know the full process for it, but under the current way of things, pre-registration must go through SCARS because we need to know who's there in the event of, I believe it's on a COVID outbreak, but nonetheless, it needs to be in SCARS, but it also has to be on the Kingdom calendar so that it's an official event. And also, to be an official event, it has to be published in the Outlandish Herald. But that also leads into your marketing scheme. If people don't know your event happens, and people don't know it's going to happen, no one's going to show up, and so it's not going to do as well as it could. So definitely be aware and have a plan for getting the word out. More than just on the Herald, you may have to use Facebook, you may have to use social media. With luck, you'll have a local social media officer to help you with that. If not, you may have to do your own marketing, but it could be one of those things that sort of spreads like wildfire. It may work out. And the next thing is find those people, find those times, get the people involved to make sure you have those hands to help it work. Have a budget. Look at the previous events, look at the information that other folks have had. If your local group has an archive of previous event records, fantastic. The Seneschal should be able to help you get access to the budgets, to the plans, to the locations, to the information, and get you a place to start, because you don't have to start from scratch. We've been doing this for 50 odd years. We've done it before. There are folks around who can help you. It's not as difficult as it looks. It is hard, but it is not impossible. If you're going to have activities at your event, definitely follow up and make sure that you have folks to help run those, that those folks have backups in the event of things going wrong. Always have that contingency plan. And once you've got it on the calendar and once the local officers are set and ready to hold this event, start marketing it. Tell everyone you can to come to your local group, have the event, and make sure that they pre-register through SCARS, so that you can make sure you have the right numbers going on. I can go into a lot more detail on budgeting in specific, but I've already used half of my time as is, and I can probably spend hours talking about budgets. But that's because that's that kind of nerd that I am. But budgeting is important. The easy thing to keep in mind is when you're working with the money, $5 per person for food if there's a feast, and work backwards from that. The variable costs are the ones that are going to get you every time. But as long as the site fee covers your variable costs for every people involved, the fixed costs should be covered as well. Site fees are generally fixed. If you're doing an outdoor event, the toilet rentals go in staggered jumps. So if you've got a handful of toilets, it's one price, but if you double the number of toilets, that's a different price. And the more people you have, the more toilets you have. So there's a lot of things that go into the variability of budgets. But as long as the estimated people that are showing up and the people who are going to be paying site fees is equal to, but preferably greater than, the expenses that's going on, you should be pretty okay. And that should be met well from your local officers when we're talking about budget approvals. Another thing to keep in mind, if the crown is going to come, it's generally considered nice, it's generally considered regular and customary to make a donation to the Kingdom Travel Fund to thank their majesties for attending. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your budgets, or find an opportunity for a Kingdom fundraiser. As Master Adam always says, never waste an opportunity for a Kingdom fundraiser. So this gives you an opportunity to be able to cover some of those, not necessarily unexpected expenses, but some of those additional expenses. But once it's all been through, everything's happened, you've got all the planning together, everyone's approved, the day of the event has arrived. The event steward's job on the day of the event is to not do anything. It is your job to make sure that everything is set up and is able to take care of itself. And your job is to be backup for everybody. But if you have enough staff and you have the right staff, you won't have to do anything but fix problems. When I ran Midwinter the first time, my job was to make sure that I had a deputy whose entire job was to make sure I was sitting down and had a glass of water in my hands, because I didn't need to do anything, because I had someone handling the vendors. I had someone handling the bar. I had someone handling the kitchen. And my job was to be there in case something came up. Now, that's a perfect world. I definitely did not spend the entire day sitting down. I was out and about doing stuff all the time. But if you plan to be sitting down, that way you have the time and you have the go to be able to deal with problems when they come up, because invariably things will happen. But being prepared for those eventualities is, I think, one of the best things that comes into it. When I ran Midwinter for the Barony of Alberon last year, we were going to do a virtual day of arts and science classes, and the first class opened and every single Zoom room crashed immediately. So we had to go and get everything set back up again. So I reached out to folks and we were able to get it going again within about 10 minutes. But because I was scheduled that I didn't have anything to do, I had the ability, I had the brain bandwidth to be able to stop, reformulate, and get everything back together again. So that's the important thing. And by the time the day the event happens, all of the work is done. All the planning is done. If the plan was good, the event will be relatively seamless. At least that's the plan. And then the event is done. After the last floor is swept and the last light is turned off, rest. As an event steward, you must rest. The job is done and you can wait. But there's always paperwork afterwards. You got to tally the expenses, you got to compare the revenues, and if everything went according to plan, you didn't lose any money, and that's fantastic. There'll be some paperwork that you have to follow up with on the local Reeve and the local Seneschal, just to make that sort of final report, and to create the information that needs to go into the archives for the next time that someone wants to run the event. If this was a fantastic success and everybody enjoyed your Byzantine event and they want to run another one, well, you've got all the paperwork from the last time. That gives the next person who wants to do this that leg up. And if you happen to be the one who wants to do that, fantastic. But if you don't necessarily want to do another event right after the first event, don't let folks pressure you into it. The nice thing about this is the SCA runs on volunteers, and volunteers are voluntary. Definitely, you could offer assistance if folks ask, but don't feel pressured to go into the next big thing unless you think you're ready. And if you enjoyed the event, fantastic. If you enjoyed running the event, excellent. Welcome to the college of folks of event stewards, and we can run forward and have more events. But that is pretty much the end of the slide. This was a really high level overview. A lot of the stuff that I talked about, I can go into much greater detail, gory detail from times, it depends. But a lot of it comes down to having a plan, having an idea, and having the support of other folks to help you make that idea become a reality. So with that, I'll go ahead and end the presentation and open it up for questions. And I see a hand in chat, so go ahead and unmute yourself. And
hey, this is Master Ua. Good brief, good presentation. You did cover a lot of stuff. A couple things you did cover: the calendars, because I put in chat to be aware of what's already on your group's calendar, but you covered that. If you're not sure where to have an event, talk to your officers. Talk to the group officers. They generally, especially the Seneschal, are aware of sites that are available or have been used in the past. They can give you suggestions on that. When it comes to the pre-reg SCARs, the big requirement is that it has to be pre-regged. SCARs requires a prepay, so you may have to have a secondary method of doing pre-reg for those people who either can't or won't prepay online.
I do remember that, this is just from conversations I had with Her Ladyship Aisha about SCARs in general. There are a lot of options within SCARs, and if you are interested, please speak with her specifically, as she'll be able to guide you through all the everything you need to do for SCARs.
Well, there's a class at 1 on setting up SCARs specifically, so she'll be able to cover a lot of that. The other thing I would say is don't put out a broad call for volunteers for your offices, because you're not going to get anyone, or for your different portions of your event. Go out and talk to people specifically.
Yes, very much so.
That people like to be asked, and if you put out and having been in the position of having to ask for volunteers and being asked for volunteers and going, oh, nobody's responding to that response, I guess I'll volunteer. Put the information out there and actually talk to people specifically for specific things. And that's what I've got for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is follow up with your officers, talk with your local people. They would love to have events. Like the SCA runs on event revenue, honestly, and your local group is funded by having events. So while there is some opportunity for fundraisers to be able to maintain the different expenses that the local group has, event revenue is where it's at. And we are a nonprofit organization, but that is, there's a difference between nonprofit and unprofit. And unprofitable is a group that has no events and has no revenue and has all of these expenses. So definitely follow up with your officers. They're the ones that know a lot of things about this, and they'll be there to help you out run the event. They definitely won't be the ones to run the event for you, but they'll definitely provide as much help as they can to make sure that it happens. Your Excellency Roland, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you. It was great overview of everything and just kind of the thought process. I liked how you did that. Your presentation was really good. And I would definitely emphasize that your officers are your subject matter experts for a couple of key aspects, particularly marshals, particularly heralds, things like that. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of times those people are chomping at the bit to help you. I can't speak to everybody everywhere, but I know that our list minister, for example, absolutely wants to be involved in every tournament because she enjoys it and wants to help. So being able to access that is very key, and I'm glad we're emphasizing that. I'd also like to say that having this plan and being able to bounce it off several people, getting people excited about it, creating that buzz, talking to people about it at your populist meetings, talking to people about it at other events. You have to become sort of the champion for your vision, right? And I think that when you have a clear vision like you outlined here in this class, and you can go out there and really sell it to the whole community, you're going to have people. That volunteer problem that sometimes we run into becomes less of a problem because everybody's kind of caught your vision and wants to go with it. They see your enthusiasm. They see the enthusiasm of the other people that have already volunteered. Now, of course, as you get to bigger and bigger events, kingdom level events, this can become more difficult, especially with a kingdom like ours, which is so spread out. Some years Battlemore has been really, really, really carried by the North. Other years it's been very, very much carried by the South in terms of volunteerism and participation. But ultimately, I think that is kind of a strategy that an event steward can use to help shore up the gaps in volunteerism is go make your vision infectious, get everybody excited about the potential, and then they're going to want to be involved, even if it's just to work a gate shift, which is no small thing. So again, great presentation, and kudos to you for doing this. Thank you.
Certainly. One other thing to keep in mind also, if you're not really sure you want to take it on right now, all of the events that already exist would love to have more assistants, and event stewards would love to have deputies. I know that at least it used to be a tradition, but I'm not sure it was ever officially a thing, that if you wanted to run Outlandish in Alberon, you were expected to be one of the deputies for this year's Outlandish, so you knew what you were getting yourself into. So you weren't going to walk in going, oh, I can make this work, it'll be fine, and then go, oh, wow, there's how much involved? And same sort of thing for Battlemore as well. I know that His Excellency Tariq was one of the co-autocrats for Battlemore 10, and as is scheduled until his move to Aidenveld, was scheduled to be the primary autocrat for Battlemore 11, as just sort of as a learning experience, as an idea, so you can gauge what's going on. For the big multi-year, big inter-kingdom events, having a good working rapport with the site is good, and if you were involved on last year's event, you'll be able to know they'll already know who you are for this year's event. And a lot of the specifics on finding a site and securing a site and things along those lines, particularly if it's a site that the little group has worked with before, they'll already know about you, and hopefully they like you. If there have been a few events where it's been, well, we know you and we don't like you, so it was difficult to get them to sign on for another year. But again, this is all things that your local officers will know about and will be able to sort of help you navigate. You don't have to do this alone. There are plenty of people available to help. And again, especially if, like Ua was saying, if you reach out to people and ask them for help, you'll get a lot more help than if you say, hi, I'm looking for help, and just sort of make it as a general call. I definitely know that when I've been running a couple of events, it does work much better to say, hey, I'm running an event and I would wonder, would you be able to help me, or do you know someone who would be able to help me run the marshalling for my event? And that works much better than saying, hey, I could use some marshals on Tuesday, and you'll actually get some response. Roland, you go ahead, Your Excellency.
Yeah, just following up, you're absolutely right, and I'm glad that you're emphasizing that point, because ultimately what you'll get in that situation is you'll get a lot of day of help, and sometimes begrudgingly so. Our kingdom, and I'm sure this isn't just unique to us, but since my bulk of my experience is here, putting the call out for heralds means that you'll get 2 or 3 walk up the day of. But if you actually go and put in a little bit of legwork, like you're saying, I think you get more of what you're looking for, which is a fuller roster of volunteers and less stress on you. Also, to follow up, something that we're looking to offer in the barony over the next couple of months as we're moving into 2022 is bid workshops. Basically, set aside time at our populist meeting / all things, where if you're interested in doing any kind of event in the next year, whether it's an all things sized event or a standalone event that happens like a midwinter or a grand outlandish or any of that stuff, to kind of make it easier and more enticing for people to take that first step, which is to build their plan. Basically begin the process that you've outlined here, and make budgeting easier, walk people through the process. I'm hoping that will have some profound effects locally. And I know it can be very intimidating, or at least that's the feedback I've gotten. But as you said so appropriately, there is a lot of help out there. I just think people need a little bit more guidance towards it. And I think if we can guide people towards that help, we're going to see that the community builds the events, and then the community is very invested, and that's all going to have positive effects.
Definitely. And it is sort of inconvenient that everyone on the call is from Alberon, or at least is Alberon adjacent. So a lot of the examples we have are Alberon specific. But this sort of thing, for the recording back later, this is applicable in every local group from Shire, College, all the way up to Barony, Kingdom, or Interkingdom. The same sort of process is what would be used if one was building, say, a bid for known world heralds and scribes. Not that I'm plugging for a particular event that I might think need to be, a bid from the Outlands be put together, but that sort of thing all of this stuff goes into that as well. Having a plan for what happens if your site falls through, what happens for virtual opportunities if you would like to have folks join from Lohawk, but they can't travel still. These sorts of things are all involved. Ua?
So having run events in 3 kingdoms, all these things do apply. The very first event I helped co-autocrat was a crown tournament in Drachenwald. And figuring out the logistics of that, and this is back in 94, 95 timeframe, so it's been a little while, and COVID wasn't a problem. But even then, getting people to travel from the continent to England is something we had to consider, especially since our crown at the time was not from England. So these are all things that have to be thought about. It's less of a problem here in the US. Travel cross borders a little easier between states, but it is something to consider. But budgeting, location planning, event volunteerism, they're all things that have to be thought about. So no, that's these Alberon examples, but they do apply wherever.
And I could go on again on another tear for another hour about volunteerism and how to properly build volunteer experiences and volunteer opportunities so that folks enjoy volunteering rather than feeling like they have to volunteer. And that's also something to keep in mind when you're designing an event, is make sure the folks that are volunteering want to be there, because then they'll do the best job they can. If they don't want to be there, they're gonna not enjoy it, and they're not going to do it well. And that's going to roll up, and the event will also reflect that. So definitely intentionality is important for all of these things. And whether it's a long-standing event that happens every year, like a 12th night, or a feast day, or if it's a brand new event that you think, hey, wouldn't it be really nifty if, all of these things sort of go into that as well. And I believe, I know at least once upon a time, Alberon specifically definitely had an archive of previous bids that they were able to sort of share around. That was 2 or 3 seneschals ago, so I'm not certain if that's still maintained and active, but it's definitely something that could be looked into.
Mistress Melodia did a really good job of digitizing a lot of that information and putting it on a Google Drive, and we still do absolutely have access. In fact, recently, some young people had approached me about putting in a bid for an event in the spring, and wanted to look at some data from things like Outlandish and Champions, and I was able to get them the data they were looking for, primarily Porta-John stuff. But yeah, having that historic data is super important, and that's why, regardless of where scars may go from here, because it's still very much in its infancy. It certainly does have the potential to offer us another tool to track what's going on and how many people are attending. And I'm very data driven in my mundane life, so being able to look back at that historic information and know what people were doing and what they were interested in versus what they weren't interested in becomes very much a tool for planning as a group moving forward. And it was very wise for Mistress Melodia to as the Seneschal to go ahead and shift us onto the digital version of the record keeping. There is still a paper archive with a lot of stuff in it, but ultimately that digital one is much more shareable, much more accessible, and in some cases, especially if you're keeping up year to year, writing the bid becomes that much easier because you've got one that's, if you're looking to do something very much the same as the year before, it's right there, and you only have to make the 2 or 3 tweaks in pricing usually for budgetary items, and then you can just drop it with your name on it, and then it makes that part of the job that much easier.
Yeah, I'm trying to recall if we had, at least in Alberon, sort of basically a pre-fillable budget form that you sort of plug in. The site cost X, the food costs Y. We're going to charge $2 a head, and we think that 100 people are going to come. Here's our numbers, and like it calculates out already. Do you even have a profit loss opportunity? I don't know if that still exists or if that's something I made up in my head.
No, we do. When you go to the Seneschal's page on our website, there are several things listed right underneath the general address from the Seneschal, and one of them is the Alberon budget form. It's a pre-fillable PDF, and it does exactly that. Is that if you've got your numbers kind of worked out, you plug in your expenditures, you plug in your estimated revenues, and then you can get a pretty firm idea just from doing that if you're gonna break even, take a loss, whatever, based on and then you obviously can tweak site fees that way and figure out what's our most comfortable buffer for this. Because I'll be honest with you, I've spent more time arguing or maybe advocating for different site fees because I see that the demographics of the people who play in our area are not the same as some of the areas in the other parts of the kingdom. So I advocate for lower when it's feasible, right? But sometimes it's not. Sometimes whatever you're doing, it's much better to have that maybe $5 bump up, because that guarantees that even if we have a slight dip in attendance, we'll be able to cover our expenditures. It's a hard thing because you want to be fiscally responsible. You don't want to ever put us in the hole if you can avoid it. But ultimately, that budget worksheet allows you to play around with it and really kind of tweak it to where you're not charging an arm and a leg, but at the same time, you are covering all of your known expenses.
Right. Grania, you've had your hand up for a while, and I apologize.
Oh, it's all good. I was just thinking about one of the pieces of advice that was given to me, actually a couple pieces of advice that were given to me when I autocratted Outlandish. One of which was, remember the things you love, and during the event, save time to do one of those things, so that at the event, you're still going to be doing something you love. Even if you spend the rest of the event putting out dumpster fires, you have that one thing at that one time that, okay, this is for me. This is my happy place. And now I can go back to putting out dumpster fires. Hopefully it's not that bad, but that was a really good piece of advice. And then I think the other piece of advice actually came from His Excellency Roland, that day of, the autocrat should project a calm, confident, everything's good, this event is great sort of demeanor, because everybody's going to be kind of watching the autocrat. How are they doing? Are they freaking out? How are things going? So even if you are putting out dumpster fires,
Do it with a smile on
to
your face.
to try and project that. And I think he also very clearly said, don't run anywhere unless it's life and death, as the autocrat, always walk for the same thing. So those were a couple of really good pieces of advice that I got that I think are important to keep sharing.
Definitely. Yeah. So we're coming up on our 5-minute warning here. We've got about 5 more minutes left in class. Ua, you got your hand up?
Kind of as an add-on to Grania, if you do have co-event stewards and deputies, try not to outpace them. If they're following along to see how things go, I walk fast. And my deputy, when Melody and I were autocrats of Outlandish, was Edric, and Edric did not walk fast. And so I would have to keep pausing so he could catch back up so we could continue our discussion. So just be aware of that.
One, it definitely is a different beast when running a multi-day event versus running a single-day event. As Garanya said, if you're running a multi-day event, definitely find time to be off. Like, you have deputies for a reason. You do not have to be on all the time. You should not be on all the time. You will get burned out and you will not enjoy yourself. And that's a bad thing. We want you to keep doing whatever it is you want to do, and please don't get burned out on everything. And even on single-day events, make sure you have lunch. Make sure you have your own lunch. Make sure you know when food is happening, so that you do not wind up at the end of the evening and go, wait, I haven't eaten anything all day, and then promptly fall down. This is bad. This is not the good proper care and feeding of an autocrat. Do not do these things to yourself, please. But yeah, definitely have that opportunity for a little bit of time for yourself, whether it's going to a class or just, not being in charge for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and have some time for yourself, because we do not want to have burnout. Go ahead.
A deputy that you can trust to handle things so you can go offline, even for half an hour. So you have that time to yourself where you can pause and relax, and not necessarily drink yourself into oblivion because, well, there's a dumpster fire going on and you're going to have to handle it, but so that you can get away from that. Because if you don't, people will be at you constantly. So you need that time. And we did that for Grania. We said our camp is a safe space. If you come in here, we will handle problems for you. So that's something that you should definitely make sure that you have. And that's for multi-day, but even a single day event, you need to take a moment, walk to the far edge of the parking lot, pause, regroup, and then go back in.
All right. Well, that's pretty much all I had for the prepared marks. The commentary from the folks online has also been very, very illuminating and very helpful. I hope everyone else has enjoyed that as well. And we'll go ahead, and if there's any further questions, we can go ahead and get that finished here. But otherwise, we can go ahead and wrap up a little early.